He traveled over 40 miles over the hills of the area that later in their history would be the land of Benjamin. Now as the sun's starting to go down, he finds himself in a lonely little valley filled with big slabs of rock, which unfortunately look kind of like gravestones. It's kind of interesting because it wasn't that far from there in a wild olive grove that Abraham had first come into the promised land. It also wasn't that far from there that Abraham and Lot had their fight and split and went their separate ways. But now he finds himself here in this valley, and perhaps even looking off in the distance, he can see the light of the Canaanite city of Luz. But that's not his destination. In fact, his destination is many days away in the city of Haran. Now, supposedly, he's on this trek because he's looking for a wife. At least that's what his mom had told his dad, but that's not the whole story. And even if he was often looking for a bride, it's very different than it was many years before when his grandfather Abraham had sent a great caravan off to Haran with his main servant and all kinds of prizes, the bride price, to buy Rebekah, to bring her back, to make his mother the wife of his father, Isaac. No, this time we find him totally alone. He has no companions, he has no friends, he has no servants. He's in that valley all by himself. And there's a reason why. It's because in reality, he's fleeing for his life. So Jacob winds up in this lonely little valley with these gravestone rocks around him in the middle of the night, and I have to wonder what's going through his mind. Here he is, the son of a rich man, yet he's out there all alone in a very dangerous place, far from his family, in fact, exiled from his family. His brother hates him, his brother wants to kill him. He doesn't know if he's ever going to be able to go back home again. He doesn't know if he can even get to Haran. He's in an area of hostility where the people he's going to encounter will more likely be enemies than friends. His life itself is forfeit. And he has to be asking himself, was it worth it? Was it worth it to lie and deceive his brother and steal his birthright, steal his blessing? Now his brother hates him. Now his brother wants to kill him. Now he's exiled. Maybe he'll never get to go home to his family again. What good is it to have those things if you can't enjoy them and go back and be with your family? I don't think I'm stretching it very far to say that had to be the state of mind of Jacob as he lays his head down that night on a rock pillow in a little lonely valley where he seems to have wound up by circumstances. The Bible just says he just happened upon that place and thought it was a good campsite. But it was much more than that. Because we're going to find that when he goes to sleep and lays his head down, he has a dream. And he has a vision of angels ascending and descending from heaven. He encounters God in that place, and God has a message for this lonely, troubled man. Follow along the message in Genesis 28, verses 10 through 22. Meanwhile, Jacob left Beersheba and traveled toward Haran. At sundown, he arrived at a good place to set up a camp, and he stopped there for the night. Jacob found a stone to rest his head against and lay down to sleep. As he slept, he dreamed of a stairway that reached from the earth to the heaven. He saw the angels of God going up and down the stairway. At the top of the stairway stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your grandfather Abraham, and the God of your father Isaac. The ground you're lying on belongs to you. I'm giving it to you and your descendants. Your descendants will be as numerous as the dust of the earth. They'll spread out in all directions, to the west, to the east, to the north, and the south. And all the families on the earth will bless through you and your descendants. What's more, I'm with you, and I'll protect you wherever you go. One day I'll bring you back to this land. I'll not leave you until I finish giving you everything I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it. But he was also afraid, and he said, what an awesome place this is. It's none other than the house of God, the very gateway to heaven. The next morning, Jacob got up very early. He took the stone he'd rested his head against and set it upright as a memorial pillar. And he poured olive oil over it. And he named that place Bethel, which means house of God, though it had previously been called Luz. Then Jacob made this vow. If God will indeed be with me and protect me on this journey, if he will provide me with food and clothing, if I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will certainly be my God. And this memorial pillar I've set up today will become a place for worshiping God. And I'll present to God a tenth of everything He gives me. And God add His blessing to the reading of His Word. Then when Brenda and I were on our way back from Mississippi, and with Allison and Emily, we made kind of a nostalgia tour through Mississippi. Now, we spent 10 years or so in Mississippi. I was in seminary. While I was there, I pastored 3 or 4 different places. And I taught at a college there in the seminary. And so we decided to kind of make a nostalgia tour on the way back. And we stopped in McGee, Mississippi, where Emily was living when she was born. And so we showed her the house. We brought her home in the church I pastored. In fact, we actually found a family still living down the street that went to that church. We were able to visit with them and see the church. And we went through Jackson, showed Emily where she was born, the Baptist hospital. She got a big kick out of that. And then we went to the very first church I ever pastored. And I don't know if you'll be able to see it up here. Kenny's going to try to put it up. This is called Bethel. The very first church I ever pastored. Bethel Independent Methodist Church. Now, to find this church, it's kind of like a redneck joke. You know, you go outside Kosciuszko. We couldn't even find it for a while. It's been over 30 years. We weren't sure which road led out of town that it was still on, you know. But you go out of town for 2 or 3 miles and you turn off the dirt road. That's how they always start the redneck jokes. You know, turn off the dirt road. You get on the gravel road, you travel back about 4 miles on the gravel road, about 3 miles past the last house that you pass, and it's surrounded by woods and stuff like that, and you come around the corner, and here's this church setting up kind of on a hill, and you can't really see, it's really beautiful. It's got a green roof, it's a white church, it's 141 years old, okay? And they're still having church there. Called Bethel Methodist Church. It looks like the church was locked up, we couldn't get in, but we went around, looked at the graveyard and things like that. Now, that was the very first church I pastored. I was a little disappointed. I expected a plaque or something, you know, saying, you know, Mark Weeder pastored here, but, you know, there was nothing like that. But I remember when I first came to pastor that church, in my own little flock, and there was really only about 25 or 30 people, about the size of this congregation, and the name of the church was Bethel. I remember thinking at the time, wow, Bethel, the house of God. That's what it means. The house of God. I said, wow, that's quite a name to live up to. You know, that's quite something to aspire to say, this is the house of God. This is where God dwells. And I always felt like, wow, that's quite a responsibility. But you know something? That also applies to us. Now, I mean, I know this isn't called Bethel Church. There might be a Bethel Church in town. I don't know. It's a pretty common name, I know. This is Cane Church Nazareth. But for us, this is the house of God, right? This is where, for us, God dwells. This is where we come to meet God. This is where we come to worship God. This is our Bethel. Now, my thought when I think about that is, you know, well, you can call yourself the house of God, but that doesn't necessarily make it so. You can put a name and slap a name on anything. It doesn't really make it that way. What does it really mean to be the house of God? And as I look at this passage, I discover really 2 things. There are certain qualities, there are certain characteristics that must be in place before you can truly call a place the house of God. And secondly, if you really truly believe this place is the house of God, it's going to require a response out of you. You cannot be the same once you understand and recognize that. You say, well, how do you know that? Because I can see it in the story. Jacob took this lonely, rock-filled valley and said, this is the place where God dwells. Something made him say that. And once he realized that God was there, it required him to do something. So this morning I want to ask ourselves, is this truly the house of God? And if so, what should that mean for us? Now, the first quality of a place that calls itself Bethel should be pretty obvious, and that is God must be in that place. God must be dwelling there. God must be living there. And you look at me and say, Dr. Weir, duh. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I mean, that's what a church is, right? A church is where God is. A church is where God dwells. A church is where you worship God. You know, duh, of course, you know, if it's going to be, you know, God has to be there. Well, I want to be careful here. I don't want to step on too many toes, but I'm going to tell you